Hey everyone, I'm back. It's been a long while, and I'd prefer to not go into the details of this hiatus because they're pretty boring and banal if you ask me. Basically, I had to finish up with my school year. It was my final year of high school. I then had to go and relieve myself from all the burdens of school. So I went away for a few weeks, I went on a few trips, I took in some fresh, clean air, and I think that did the trick, because now I'm feeling quite relaxed and really eager for these coming holidays. I'm in a position of relative peace. I've got more leisure than I've had in months and months, and so I'm going to channel this newfound leisure and energy into making videos for this channel. Something I've wanted to do all year, of course, just time hasn't allowed that until now. Which brings us to this video here, the here and now. When I decided I wanted to film something today, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about, and so I've decided just to select a book off my shelf, a book I've been looking at recently, and I'm going to discuss it for 5 minutes or so. I might pique your interest, you might be able to tell me something about this book which I'm currently unaware of. At the very least, it'll help get my mind back in gear, because it takes some time for me to readjust to speaking to a camera in this way. It always feels a little unnatural for some reason, I don't know. So, the book that I have chosen is Paradise Lost by John Milton. Chances are you have heard of this one before, because it has an esteemed place in the English literary canon, and I can certainly see why. I've read book 1 of this. There are 12 books, so I'm still very inexperienced. But I've read book 1 about 4 times, and I'm absolutely enthralled by the thing. I think it's bloody amazing. And so I hope in this video, I'll be able to articulate to you just why I love it, at least to some degree. I think this could warrant like a whole study, and maybe one day when I get this finished, I can come back and talk about it some more. So, Paradise Lost was published back in 1667. I don't know much about Mr. Milton, the author. The only detail which stuck with me after I briefly skimmed his Wikipedia page before was that he composed this whilst being entirely blind, and he dictated to an amanuensis, or someone who takes dictation, for want of a better definition. And I just think that's a really impressive image. I'm imagining him there, standing with his eyes closed, just solemnly composing these verses in his mind, rearranging all the words, and that is a really impressive feat, considering the fact that this is entirely written in blank verse. That's a form of poetic meter which is in iambic pentameter, and I believe that just means there are 10 syllables in every line. It might be more complicated than that, but I'm kind of ignorant. Anyhow, it would be difficult enough to compose that, being able to structurally see how every word slots in on the page, but to do that in your mind is just incredible. So I'm pretty sure he's a creative genius, and you know, he's got that reputation across the centuries. The fact we're talking about him now, I think, suggests in itself that he was a creative genius. This work has a really big cultural legacy, and that's probably the first way I heard about it, probably through artists and even musicians who have been inspired by this. You may be familiar with William Blake, a really impressive, in fact he's another creative genius, a really impressive poet and author and philosopher of the 18th century. He derived so much inspiration from this. He did a sketch of Milton himself, which I find kind of amusing. I don't think Milton looked like that. Like, it just looks like a very romanticized image, but hey, I guess we can afford to do that to our idols. There's also the artwork, the tremendously overblown artwork of John Martin, I believe his name is? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's John Martin, John Milton inspired John Martin, an English painter of the Romantic era, who does these massive apocalyptic paintings. You've probably run into them before, but they were inspired in large part by Milton as well. And then of course there were the engravings by Gustave Doré, or Doré. He did these engravings for an 1800s edition of Paradise Lost, and to this day they are brought out and adulated, and for good reason. They're really amazing pieces of art. It's very easy to view them with awe, even when they're divorced from the context of this book. Now, it would probably be an idea now for me to tentatively talk about the story. I say tentatively because I've only read book 1, as I said, so I don't really know what's going to follow. But from my understanding, this poem is based upon a classic division between good and evil. Representing the evil side, we have none other than Satan, the apostate angel, who dared defy God and waged war against his holy kingdom. As you could guess, on the other side we have God, the most almighty ruler of heaven and earth. It's quite a standard kind of biblical formula, I suppose. In book 1, things commence in medias res, which means in the middle of things, just a standard kind of literary technique. And Satan is confined to hell. He's in these horrid catacombs, and he's got his many denizens with him who decided to join with him in arms to take on God. And he's been defeated. He is absolutely woeful. His life is despondent and painful, and grief abounds in this setting. But even so, we have this image, this idea of Satan still being proud, still being very much in control, and still having this inner confidence that he can ascend to the throne of God. It's pretty powerful stuff. If I could just read you a little bit of Satan's first speech. He's speaking to Beelzebub, who's basically his second in command, because you really get a sense of someone whose pride has been slighted, and yet they're not prepared to back down. So he's talking to Beelzebub. He says, "If thou beest he, but oh, how fallen! How changed from him, who in the happy realms of light, clothed with transcendent brightness, didst outshine myriads, though bright." So there's this idea of the fall, the drastic fall from a position of heavenly beauty and perfection to hellish and nightmarish confinement. Something interesting about this poem, from my perspective, is that even though it's a Christian work through and through, it engages a lot with these references to the classical world, whether it's Roman and Greek mythology, or whether it's various conquests that happened back in the ancient days. And the way that Milton does this makes me understand how historically this fits in. This is well and truly a work which is emerging after the Renaissance. There has been this revival of classical ideas, and so in a sense it seems to me that Milton is taking the classical ethos, epic poetry, which is a classical tradition, and he's transposing that to this new world of Christian England, and he's managing to fuse it so perfectly. He begins with an invocation to the Muse, and this is quite interesting because of course that was a commonplace tradition back in the ancient days. The poet was said to have just been sent his lines by a muse, which is a deity, a goddess of art basically, and you'd expect that Milton would try and avoid such a pagan tradition. But in fact, he does invoke the Muse. He just does it in a slightly special way, and I'll just read a little bit out so you might be able to work out who this Muse in fact is, because it's not Calliope, it's not Erato, it's not any of those Greek muses. It's someone a little bit different, or something a little bit different. He refers to the Muse in these terms, and I think this is some of the most beautiful poetry I've read. "O spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, instruct me, for thou knowest. Thou from the first wast present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like satst brooding on the vast abyss, and madest it pregnant." I'd say the dove imagery there makes me think of the Holy Spirit. And so he's taken this Greek tradition and he's just contorted it in such a way that it still fits in, except it's very much a Christian idea now. I think that's amazing, and it shows just how seamless the transition from the classical pagan world to the post-Renaissance Christian world can be. I'm wary of making this video too long, and I'm realizing now that I could probably talk about just book one for a very long time. So I might finish by just discussing for a moment a simile, a really impressive simile. And similes are really centrally important to epic poetry. Homer is a master of them. He takes these commonplace ideas and these commonplace phenomena and he likens them to some grand event which is happening in his poem, and he pulls it off superbly. Milton has inherited that same talent. This simile comes as Satan summons his soldiers to attention. They have been languishing in the penal fires of hell, and now he has come to command them that they rise, that they rouse themselves, and they prepare to again take on God. So he commands them, "Awake, arise, or be forever fallen." And here's the simile. "They heard and were abashed, and up they sprung upon the wing, as when men want to watch on duty, sleeping found by whom they dread, rouse and bestir themselves ere well awake." I think that's so vivid. What I'm imagining there is kind of a corporal pacing up the line and coming across some soldiers who are meant to be on duty, but they're kind of slacking off, they might be dozing, and then as soon as they see him coming, they suddenly jump up, they make their backs all straight and taut, and they give him a salute. That's the idea I get in my head. It's just so vivid, and it's an image I'm still able to visualize despite the many centuries that have elapsed since John Milton came up with it. I think that's a sign of a good simile. It needs to be a commonplace phenomenon which is relatable to all people across all cultures. I think I'll finish this video here. There is plenty more that I could pluck out of this to talk about, and I might make a follow-up video to this. Let me know in the comments whether you have any opinions on Paradise Lost, and I hope to see you very shortly with another video. Thank you for sticking with me all these months and all these weeks. I'll see you next time. Farewell.